Hello, Ollie members. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nancy Murr and I handle communications here at Ollie. This is going to be an important and I am sure clarifying next hour. Thanks to a presentation by the League of Women Voters of Berkeley, Albany, and Emeryville. And their representatives, Regina Beatus, Ruby McDonald, and Cynthia Chen. The plan is to go through the 7 state ballot measures, ballot propositions first, open the chat and go through questions in the chat about those state propositions. And then we'll move on to Alameda County, and if there's time, to some of the Oakland and Berkeley measures as well. So a little bit of the housekeeping questions go into the chat, and we'll get to them as we finish those various sections. So because there is a lot to discuss, I am going to turn over the floor to Regina first, and take it away, Regina. Thank you so much.
Welcome. This is wonderful to be here today. The League of Women Voters, as many of you know, is nonpartisan. We try to give unbiased information about the elections, and we want to inform and have active citizen participation. We do, however, influence public policy through education and advocacy. We have a lot of resources to help you with the League of Women Voters for the state, for our Albany, Berkeley, Emeryville. There is the League of Women Voters California. We have also Voters Edge, which is a joint project with the League of Women Voters and Matt Light. Very good resource. The Easy Voter Guide is quite popular for people who are busy people and just want some basic information. So we'll go right into Proposition 1, which is the right to reproductive freedom. So Proposition 1, it amends the California Constitution so it explicitly includes the right to reproductive freedom. So the way it is currently, it's not specifically mentioned, but there was a California Supreme Court case that decided that the right to privacy and equal protection included a person's right to have an abortion or choose whether they would have contraceptives or not. The US Supreme Court, of course, has banned the right to abortion, so there's concern of the climate and what is happening. So this is a way to strengthen what is on the law. So supporters say the California Constitution should be protecting these rights specifically, and that reproductive health decisions really need to be where they belong, and that is with the individual and with their doctor or medical provider. The opponents are concerned that California is going to get swamped with people coming from out of state. I've actually seen one of those signs. I was kind of surprised. People feel that there's already a law, or we're covered with California. So now, so the supporters for this measure are mainly Planned Parenthood and its affiliates. So now we'll go to there are 2 gambling measures on the ballot, number 26 and 27. One is for the in-person sports betting on tribal lands. And right now, the tribal casinos offer poker, bingo, and other games. I've actually never been there to see that. So the sports betting that would be allowed under this would actually be sports betting, roulette, and dice games. This would allow in-person with these games, and it would change the California Constitution and state law. The 4 racetracks are included this for offering in-person betting, and 10% tax would be on the net sports betting after they pay out whatever they pay out for and that's on the 4 racetracks. So the tribal casinos are actually required to renegotiate their agreements with the state to really specify the minimum payments that they need to make to the state. So that's a little different entity there. And one other thing on this measure is that individuals can actually file a civil action against gaming violations that they see if the California Attorney General is not acting on violations. And this proposition has 70% going to the general fund. After it will be in another fund first as they deduct some of the costs. There's a 15% on enforcement and 15% on mental health. There's quite a bit of support when you see the millions for contributions supporting. So in terms of supporters, what they say, the supporters say, well, this continues the 20-year legacy of allowing support to the American Indian tribes. It allows them to have vital services for infrastructure, healthcare, education for their tribal members. And opponents say this just expands gambling in California, and we're going to have more problems. It's bad for public health and safety. So that is our Prop 26, which was put on after this next proposition was put on regarding online mobile sports betting. So this allows the online and mobile sports betting outside tribal lands. So the way it is now, each state can decide if they would like to legalize sports betting. It's not in the federal government's domain. So this would establish a California online sports betting trust fund. This is the one you hear on the news a lot. This will be having revenues go to the homeless for mental health needs, et cetera. And it also will support the Native American tribes who are not doing online gambling. Those in rural areas probably not with casinos that are in need. So the contributors here, actually, there is a lot of opposition in terms of contributions. And 85% of this fund goes to the homeless, 15% to the tribes. So supporters on this proposition, they feel that regulating the sports betting will protect the gamblers. And they feel this is a good thing. This goes to the homeless and helps some of the disadvantaged tribes. And the opponents say that large out-of-state gambling, the companies out of our state would profit. And there's concern that this is going to make gambling so accessible to many people since it's online or mobile sports betting. One thing I wanted to mention is that the tribes and the online gaming companies, the tribes can offer online sports betting. There's a $10 million licensing fee, and there's a renewal every 5 years for a lesser fee. The gambling companies can offer online sports, and they pay $100 million for the licensing fee. And then every 5 years, there's a renewal fee. So this I just wanted to mention, this can include tribal lands as well as the gaming companies that are out of state. So I will turn this over to Ruby McDonald. She will be continuing with Proposition 28.
Thank you, Regina. So Prop 28 is having to do with funding arts and music in public schools. Currently, only about 1 in 5 public schools actually has a really well-defined music and arts program. So the idea is to take 1% or $1 billion of the allocation to public education, K through 12 education in the state of California, for a really robust arts and music program. And many people feel that arts and music really is important for mental development and could even encourage students who have issues with attendance to attend more regularly. So the main thing here is equity, because as I said, so many schools do not have arts and music. So this 1% of the allocation, or $1 billion approximately, 80% of it would go towards supporting the arts and music teachers. 20% of it would pay for supplies and training of staff. So there is a lot of support for it and not a lot of opposition to Prop 28. This was incidentally spearheaded by the former superintendent of the LA Unified School District, Austin Boitner, and Arne Duncan, whom some may remember as the Secretary of Education under Barack Obama. So the next proposition, Proposition 29, has to do with obtaining more clean cars and air in California with a tax on personal income above $2 million. So it's sometimes known as the millionaire's tax, but this is only for that income above $2 million. And that would be 1.75% on the excess or greater than $2 million. Nevertheless, it would yield 3.5 to $5 billion. And this new revenue would not go into the general fund, would go into a special clean air fund and be divided up in the following ways. The Clean Air Fund would, 35% of the Clean Air Fund would go towards building charging stations. You hear a lot about one of the problems with zero emission vehicles, there being not enough charging stations. So the charging stations will be built with the 35% of the revenue. 45% of the revenue in the Clean Air Fund would go towards enabling drivers, particularly low-income drivers, to obtain zero-emission vehicles. And that would include not only cars, but trucks and buses, which can also be a problem in terms of the greenhouse gases and pollution. They have been emitting in our air and causing a lot of problems in terms of health, but also, of course, for global warming and climate change. So that's 80%. And the final, the 35 plus 45, 80%, the final 20% will go towards wildfire fighting to enable, of course, firefighters to be more effective, and they've done such a wonderful job, but they could use more resources, as well as wildfire suppression, mitigation efforts in order to make sure that wildfires are not so likely to happen. And supporters, of course, cite the value of Prop 30, bringing in this revenue to make our air cleaner and to fight climate change, which we all know from watching the news becomes more and more dire all the time, not just with respect to wildfires, but all sorts of manifestations of global warming. The opponents seem to feel that the millionaires who are going to pay this 1.75% above the $2 million that is not affected might leave the state because of this increase in their personal income taxes. And by the way, people are always citing our California's high personal income tax. It's true that we do have a higher personal income tax, but that's because we have such a low property tax. And those of us who remember what Prop 13 did in 1978 will realize that money has to come from somewhere. And so it is true that we do have a higher personal income tax in the state of California for that reason. Okay, so if we move on now to Prop 31, Prop 29. I think I probably skipped over Prop 29. Prop 29 is the Requirements for Kidney Dialysis Act. You know, just as personal aside, I have been an OLLI attendee, so maybe I'm a little bit nervous about this, speaking to all you OLLI people. Prop 29, or the Requirements for Kidney Dialysis Act. So this is the third attempt by labor unions to try to pass some change in the laws. So the SEIU, which is the major union, including the healthcare workers who actually perform the kidney dialysis, this group wants three changes, major changes to the laws. First, they want to have a doctor, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant be present during the dialysis of patients who need this treatment for survival. In addition, they would like to have the infections resulting from kidney dialysis be reported to the state public health. Currently, those data are reported to the federal government, but they feel that this is necessary for California to collect those data. And thirdly, they would like to have the physicians reveal their financial ties to the kidney dialysis companies who perform the kidney dialysis for the 80,000 Californians who need it. The kidney dialysis companies, it apparently is true, do make quite a bit of money from this medical service. In fact, I've read that they actually obtain perhaps 6 times the amount that is obtained by hospitals. So this has something to do with the antagonism, I guess, between the labor unions and the companies. But if you go to Voter's Edge, as Regina suggested, a very important part of Voter's Edge, as she showed, is the contributions of those who want to influence voters on their various propositions. And currently, the supporters, that is the labor unions, have donated about 1/10 the amount of money as the kidney dialysis companies, 3/4 of whom, by the way, I think is common knowledge, are owned by DaVita and Fresenius. So there does seem to be some basis for this disagreement between the two companies. Okay, so that's kidney dialysis. And sorry, if we can go next to Prop 31. Okay, finally, Prop 31 is a referendum. It's not a regular proposition, which gets on the ballot by the accumulation of enough signatures to qualify. This is a referendum on a law, SB 793, which was passed about 2 years ago by the California State Legislature to ban the sale of tobacco products which are flavored by tobacco companies in order to entice particularly young people to take up smoking. And the concern is the data that shows that young people are particularly prone to becoming addicted in this way. So to counteract this health hazard, the legislature passed SB 793, but the law requires a referendum on laws that are passed, and the tobacco companies are taking a second opportunity to prevent the law from coming into effect. They have already defeated it once, by the way, in the same way as they're trying to do now. And so the supporters, of course, cite the health hazards of this law for young people. The opponents, the tobacco companies largely, will cite the need for all of us to buy whatever we want to buy, and are also citing the loss of revenue which would occur if these flavored tobacco products were not sold any longer. But again, I would remind people that the millions or even hundreds of millions that would be lost compared to the even the general fund of the budget of the state of California, which can go as high as $200 billion. We're not sure at this point. At any given time, it will depend on how the economy is doing, what the final number will be. But when you compare something like 200 billion to even hundreds of millions, well, it's not even going to be that much, but at any rate, it does not seem quite as significant. So thank you very much, and we can go on.
All right, thank you both so much for that. This sees like a shorter state ballot than usual. Maybe that's just my imagination, but we seem to have a few fewer propositions. There are some questions, particularly about Prop 29 and Prop 30 in the chat. And Ruby, you had touched on some of this in your discussion about Prop 29, which is how do we as lay people really evaluate whether the changes that are needed, whether they are indeed needed, what is the safety, is dialysis already safe for the most part, and this reporting mechanism. Can you just clarify a little bit about that? I confess, when I saw that there was another dialysis proposition, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like we are discussing dialysis in every election. So if you could just provide a little bit more clarity on that.
So, unfortunately, there are backstories to these measures or efforts on these measures, which we can't really verify, but reading sources like Cal Matters, which is a nonprofit online news service, for those who don't know it, as well as a variety of news sources, I should say, will be helpful. There's some indication that the unions, particularly SEIU, are hoping that the appearance of this Proposition 29 will put pressure on the companies that they are now in negotiations with in Southern California. I can't really, say about the accuracy of those stories, but that does appear in various news sources, not just Cal Matters. So, it may have something to do with the Prop 29 appearing. I would say, though, that kidney dialysis is, sorry, I think Regina was going to say something. Kidney dialysis it's true that kidney dialysis companies do employ medical staff to be monitoring these clinics, and perhaps not really necessary to have someone actually present during the dialysis. But again, it's hard for lay people, even myself, to comment on this question. But it does seem, given the sort of fraught state, I would say, of healthcare delivery in this country, that perhaps there could be some better way of evening out the costs of these different services, so that the system would operate more equitably and efficiently.
And Regina, yes, you're on mute. Take away that mute and you'll be set.
Yes. Now, the only difference I see between the dialysis ballot measure on 2020, is that now, before it was that a physician had to be on site. So this time they're saying it could be a physician or a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant. That's the change I saw. And things that I've read, I just want to mention that there is some concern that this takes medical professionals away from our hospitals, and may impact the rural areas even more, where doctors are not as willing to be working. So I just wanted to add that in.
And has the league taken a position on?
So the league neither supports nor opposes Prop 29.
Okay.
In fact, just for the record, the league has supported Props 1 and 31. And So even those which were not supported, they might not necessarily be because of a disagreement with the proposition, but all of the positions are based on studies that the league has done over the years. And if it happened that the league has not studied issues connected with a proposition, then they will not venture any opinion on whether the proposition should be supported. So we are very evidence-based in that way, not speaking when we don't feel qualified to do so.
There's a question or a couple of questions about Prop 30. As I'm scrolling through all of these as I take a look. One member asked whether or not it's true that Lyft is a strong proponent of it, and why is Governor Newsom opposed?
So I gather that Governor Newsom was, shall we say, nettled by the fact that Lyft has contributed a lot. Lyft, the I don't take Lyft, so I'm not conversant with this terminology. So Lyft has contributed a lot to the campaign for Yes on 30, and he feels that they're doing this in order to themselves profit from the fact that they have pledged to use all zero emission vehicles by 2023 or something of that sort. And so it's kind of like self-interest, and they are abusing the taxpayer, well, making use of the taxpayers' contributions.
Okay.
It seems somewhat superficial, but that was the reason given.
Lyft has had a strong voice in our elections recently, so
Yeah.
a well-funded voice. For Prop 1, if a federal ban goes into effect, will having this right in our state constitution still protect, override the federal ban, or will the federal ban override the state?
Well, I think this is, we're hoping it does not, but we think this will strengthen, so there's less risk of problems coming up. I know it's interesting because with marijuana, the federal law has a certain law, and California legalizes marijuana. With online mobile gambling, the federal government cannot tell the states what to do. So I'm just assuming, I don't really know the answer. I would think on something like the abortion, although this is the US Supreme Court, so that's a little different from federal law. So that has a lot more weight. That's about all I could really offer on that.
Okay. And then going back to the two gaming propositions, which are confusing, and I feel we've been inundated with months of advertising on both sides, certainly to my bafflement, trying to decipher what's going on. So Janice in the chat poses a question that the tribal betting propositions are confusing. They are indeed. Are non-federally recognized tribes included anywhere in these expected revenues that go back to the tribes? And how many states have online gambling? Do you happen to know that as well?
That's interesting. That's what I was asking myself this morning, and didn't research that actually. So the tribal lands, they are like an entity in their own, like a separate nation, one can say. So they always have to have a contract with the state of California. So that's, and then there's also concern that since they're not quite under all the rules of California, that their workers may not have minimum wage, they may not have all the benefits that may be rules in California. I'm not sure that answers the question at all. And I don't know if anyone else, if Cynthia knows about the how many states have the online mobile gambling. I don't know that answer.
Okay.
Can I just say, I think some of these questions, I think we're all aware that we're these days somewhat in a state of flux, and we're looking for future court cases, litigation, as well as moves at the state legislative level for clarification. And you know, even the online gamble or the gambling question, that up until 2018, the federal government had a ban on these activities. So, and here we are now where the ban has been lifted, and essentially, you know, states are scrambling to decide what they individually are going to do. And so this, it seems to me, has made it imperative for more people to study their state legislature, their state government activities, and realizing the importance, the power that the states will have. In a way, it's a very positive change for all of us to become more engaged and knowledgeable about our state government.
Mm-hmm. And David just offers this clarification: federal law does prevail over state law on the same subject. So it would appear to me that a federal law banning abortion would override Prop 1 if that were the case down the line. And so
Thank you for
so thank you for that. So why don't we go to Alameda County and then Oakland and Berkeley? I think that's the next, those are the next stops on our tour of the measures coming to us in November.
Yeah, great. Alameda County has one measure. It's Measure D, which is an amendment to Measure D from November 2000. And this is to preserve and enhance agriculture in the unincorporated areas. This doesn't really impact us so much, but they're calling it the Save Agriculture and Open Space Lands. And it has to do with increasing this floor area ratio. So they can increase the agricultural buildings by 0.025 square of this ratio. And there's a maximum of 60,000 square feet for covered equestrian arenas. This is probably more detailed than you wanted to hear. What's important is that the initial authors approved this change for Measure D. And also the Alameda County Planning Commission unanimously recommended this change for Measure D. So it's affecting the East County areas and the Castro Valley general plan. So the East County is probably the Livermore area. So the pro arguments, they're feeling this will continue to prohibit uncontrolled development in those areas, these unincorporated areas, and protect open space. The arguments again say Measure D is really designed by the corporations to promote them that deal with a large parcel agriculture, and that these wineries could triple in size, they say. So that's kind of it on Measure D. We can move, we have time, which is great, to cover a little bit of the local Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville, just briefly, and then a bit on Oakland. So Ruby will go ahead with Berkeley.
So the three measures which Berkeley, actually the city council and the mayor, have put on the ballot are L, M, and N. Measure L is known as the bond measure, actually the largest bond in the history of the city of Berkeley. And it came about because the council and their staff calculated that owing to the great age of the wonderful city of Berkeley, problems are arising with aging infrastructure, roads, buildings, and the lack of affordable housing. And that all of these would cost to remedy on the order of $1.2 or $3 billion. Now, in order to obtain enough money to address these really pressing needs, the city of Berkeley decided to go the usual route that most cities do, actually, is to sell bonds totaling $650 million. Okay, now the $650 million that they would obtain by the sale of these, there are three different types of bonds, I guess. These are general obligation bonds, and so it would take something like 40, 45, depending on economic conditions, years to pay off. But with this money, they would be able to attract matching funds from the federal, state, and even, I understand from some remarks by Sophie Hahn, council member, from county sources. So by leveraging this amount of money, which would come from increase in property taxes, and it works out to a relatively nominal increase in the property taxes, we would then be, or the city of Berkeley, sorry, full disclosure, I'm not a resident of the city of Berkeley, that they would be able to obtain close to the amount of money that's needed to build the housing that is necessary according to the latest regional housing needs allocation requirement, to fix roads, to underground electrical structures, particularly in areas where there's access in the event of fire emergency would require that passage of vehicles in those areas. So undergrounding, which is very expensive, of course, and certain buildings which are needed. For instance, the city hall, which has been declared unusable. So, you know, that infrastructure being brought up to a safe standard would be supported by this measure. And incidentally, the previous Measure T, if you remember that, these were all in anticipation of this time when they would finally address what was clear would become a problem because the city of Berkeley is, you know, so wonderfully old. Measure M is the no vacancy measure. So it's seen that a number of property owners have kept their housing vacant, sometimes for so many years as to result in sort of a blight in the neighborhood. So the city is wanting to levy a tax of, so I think it's $3,000 for single family dwellings, rental properties, and $6,000 for larger structures, larger residences. And in order not just to collect revenue, but also to discourage this this behavior on the part of property owners whose non-compliance is adding to the problem of homelessness. And so that's they're quite detailed provisions of this Measure M. And Measure N is in connection with the regional housing needs allocation required by the state government, which is, becoming much more proactive in solving the problems of homelessness and affordable housing, which have been going on since 1970s. That according to the state constitution, Article 34, I guess, in order to go through with this, the RENA allocations program, the city or the government entity, whatever it is, needs to authorize the approval of what the RENA, regional housing needs allocation decision is. So that is what Measure N is supposed to do if approved by the voters of Berkeley. Oh, I forgot to say that. Now, Measure L, of course, would require 2/3 approval by the voters, and the others are majority vote. And the League of Women Voters actually support these measures, L, M, and N.
Thank you so much. And Regina, are you going to take on some others? Thank you, Ruby.
And I was just going to briefly mention that the League of Women Voters is also supporting Measure K with the city of Albany, as well as Measure O with the city of Emeryville. So I think we'll just have enough time to touch on Oakland. And that's where we have 10 measures. So there's a lot there. And like other cities, Berkeley has the bond measure. Emeryville has a measure there also for infrastructure. I believe it's a bond measure as well. And Oakland has a big bond measure. And that again, too, is like Berkeley, to finish work that had been done and not completed under a bond measure they had back in, I think it was KK, yes, KK in 2016. And their bond measure, of course, Oakland's much bigger than Berkeley. So their measure is for $850 million. And they have money going into rehabilitation of buildings, as well as new construction for affordable housing I'm so happy to see that real rehabilitation is in there when I see that with cities where there are vacant huge buildings that they can save because there are only so many construction companies and lumber is expensive, which they use for rehabilitation as well. So 250 million is going to go for street paving and pedestrian safety, very similar to Berkeley. 210 million for the city facilities that are aging as well for fire, police, and parks. So they've lumped that together. So these are important bond measures, and I know some people are concerned when these get paid off. Some cities are under bonded where they can add more bonds. Other cities have too many bonds. People are concerned that we don't pay those off first. So other things for Oakland, I don't know if Cynthia has it's okay. She could show this on screen possibly. They have maybe everyone's interested in the zoo. The zoo is in the measure, and that's a parcel tax. Let's see, that's for I think $67. It's not huge, but there's opposition because that's about approximately $12 million that would come annually. So there's concern in Oakland because only about 15% of the residents in Oakland use the zoo. It's well used by outsiders. And Oakland and Alameda County already do give tax money to the zoos. There's some concern there. They're also covering tax revenues for the Oakland Museum and a lot of other nice cultural events Oakland has to offer. So we also have a renewal of a nice measure for the Oakland Unified School District, Measure N, to extend a college and career readiness act that there has been good success with to offer to help have fewer kids drop out of high school, to offer other college career readiness programs. That's a partial tax. It's a renewal, so that's been on the books. They don't want it to expire. It's about $120 for a parcel tax for that. They have a just cause eviction. That's Measure V. That has to do with trying to limit the eviction of families with children while they're in the Oakland Unified School District to lessen the disruption. Of course, you can still have evictions for a lack of payment or damage to property, violating some of the rules at the rental. So that has to do with allowing families to stay when they're still paying rent through the school year. And we have, let's see what else we have. There's a progressive tax, and this is, this is a business tax where that would change, so it's progressive. So if approved, companies that with $1 million or less in gross receipts would pay a lower tax going forward than the companies that make more than $1 million per year. They'll see their taxes go up. So Oakland feels they're pointing to Richmond and to San Francisco and San Jose that have these progressive taxes. So that's, they're feeling that's something they could handle as well. So what I wanted to say is that there is such good information online these days. For Oakland, if you go to League of Women Voters Oakland, it's actually lbwoakland.org. You actually can find videos on all 10 of these measures. You can also find what the league supports and does not support, with some details why they're not supporting. And this is also the case for the state of California. The measures that we have covered today, these 7 measures, you can find from the League of Women Voters California.org. So it's LVWC.org. You can actually see these videos with the pros and cons. So with this day and age with the internet, it's actually wonderful how we can access a lot of this information and tell our friends about it. And there is the Voter's Edge, which is quite fun because you just put your address in, your zip code, and your ballot comes up and you can see a lot of good information, who's supporting, who isn't. And it's a little more detailed information, which a lot of people like. Some people much prefer the League of Women Voters Easy Voter Guide. And that's really nice and simple. And it's a great resource. You can get that online on the League of Women Voters California site. And it's in Spanish, English, Chinese, a number of other languages. So that's a good resource to tell your friends. And just to help make us all more engaged and making it easy for us to try to make these decisions. We're not here to make you vote the way the league votes. We're here to have you be engaged and look at the pros and cons and make your decision and have your discussions. So I really thank you for this opportunity that we could join today, and I appreciate people taking the time to join.
Thank you so much, Regina and Ruby and Cynthia. There is a quick question by Beth in the chat, and it's a great one simply because I am a longtime Oakland resident and find these bond measures particularly confusing because I feel like, didn't I vote for that, 4 years ago or 8 years ago, or, is there a chart that sort of tracks these measures, the dollar impact of existing bonds when they sunset, just for an overview of what is current now, not just for Oakland, but is there just some place to find what's going on with the bonds?
So one place resource I often consult is the Legislative Analyst's Office. This is the advisor to the California State Legislature. And unfortunately, they are underfunded, so they don't cover as much as we really need. But that's a place to start. But again, I would refer back to some of these nonprofit online news sources like Cal Matters, which has really grown into quite an authoritative presenter. And I did notice, they are not afraid of graphs and numbers. So you might be able to do a Google search of a particular subject that you're interested in, and find more quantitative data that way. The problem is really that people shy away from quantitative data, and you're really on to something, Nancy, by wanting to find those numbers, because that's where the really important, you can make your decision based on something that's factual instead of emotional. And I would really encourage people to do that.
That's great. And credit goes to Beth in the chat. I was simply agreeing, thinking that would be a great idea, but no, the idea was hers. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so time to thank you all three for joining us from the League, and all of the members who joined us to get some perspective and insights and hear what the league is recommending or not. So thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it. Go vote. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.